Brought to you by 1AAuto.com, your source for quality replacement parts and the best service on the internet.
Hi, I'm Mike from 1AAuto. I hope this how-to video helps you out. And next time you need parts for your vehicle, think of 1AAuto.com. Thanks.
In this video, we're going to show you rear hub replacement on this 1985 Chevy Corvette. We're going to show you the right hand or passenger side. The left hand driver side rear hub is the same procedure. You'll need a hub or hubs from 1AAuto.com, jack and jack stands, 19, 21, and 22 millimeter sockets. You also need a 36 millimeter socket. I put a star next to that one because that's one that's not usually in the toolbox. Ratchet and extensions, breaker bar and/or a pipe for some extra leverage, T55 Torx driver, a hammer and a punch, pliers, torque wrench, and a flashlight.
I use a pair of pliers to squeeze the cotter pin. Sometimes it's just easier to just twist it and break it off, but squeeze the cotter pin and force it back through. Start by removing the lug covers, just using a 19 millimeter wrench or 19 millimeter socket, and spin those lug covers off by hand. Then, if you're not, there's a washer or a cap, pull off, and then use a 36 millimeter or actually an 1 7/16 socket and remove the nut, and you can do this with an impact wrench as I do, or have somebody hold the brakes and use a breaker bar and do it that way. Now there are two bolts that hold the caliper bracket assembly. One's very easy right there, and then one is kind of inside of a bracket. You can see me pointing at the top of the screen right there. These bolts are 18 millimeters, so you can see I'm just using a socket and a ratchet to get to that top one. A little bit of force and it comes off. And don't take it all the way out yet. You can take it most of the way out, but you want to leave it in to help out with the bottom one. Okay, for the bottom one, you'll want to put on an 18 millimeter wrench onto the bolt, and usually you need a little extra torque, so I'm just going to hook on an additional wrench to the bottom, and that gives me extra leverage, and I can get the bolt loose. And then this bottom one is just, you can only turn it about 1/8 of a turn at a time, and it's just kind of a exercise in patience and slowly getting that bolt out. And once I have the bottom one out, then I can return to the top one, remove it the rest of the way, and then pull the caliper and bracket assembly off and put it up to the side where it won't hang down. Next is to remove the disc. On the other side of this car, the disc just pulled right off. This one was a little more difficult. Thread the lug nut on there just to make sure it doesn't go flying off. Use the piece of wood to protect your disc. Once it starts moving, I can tell it's coming pretty easily, so the hammer's not going to do any damage to it. So I just tap it, move it a couple positions, and then shake it off and remove the lug nut and pull the disc right off. Okay, now comes the fun. The hub is held by 3 Torx bolts. You can see one right below the U-joint there, and then one at the top corner, and then one right to the left of the drive shaft there. Okay, in order to give you every chance, I'd use some penetrating oil and just spray the back side of the bolts. You can just access them either in behind the axle flange or through the holes in the hub. For good measure, I use an impact tool, line up the hole with the back side of the bolt, and pound it with a hammer a few times. Just helps loosen up each bolt. Okay, after dousing with some penetrating oil and hammering them from the back side, these are T55 Torx bolts. I put the socket and there's a 6-inch extension. I'm using my breaker bar just to tap the bit into the bolt, make sure it's seated really well. Okay, then put that's a 3/8 flex handle I'm using, and then I'm going to use a nice big piece of pipe. Gives me some extra leverage, and then you got to make sure that that Torx bit is in there well, and just keep adding pressure, and it breaks free. Okay, now I go to the next one, and you may find what you want to do is just break the bolts free first, because you may need to just turn the drive shaft a little bit to be able to get the extension and Torx bit in.
We're going to disconnect the leaf spring, so lift it up first, then use pliers, straighten the cotter pin out, and pull it. And then you'll use a 21 millimeter wrench on top and a 22 millimeter wrench on bottom, and remove that bolt or nut, and then let the spring down to give yourself more access to the last bolt.
1/2-inch ratchet, small extension, adapter, and T55.
Okay, I'm pretty specific there with the tools because there's limited space to get in there. You can see I have a little trouble getting it in. And you see I put the jack underneath. Sometimes changing the geometry of the suspension a little bit allows you to get the wrench in there better. Use a flashlight and finally get the Torx bit in. And you can see it takes quite a bit of force to break the bolt loose, but once it's going, it comes out. And you can see here I change over to an air ratchet and just get the bolts out the rest of the way. Okay, here I'm using a 2-jaw puller. You put the teeth around the hub flange, and then the center goes onto the axle. And actually, it comes off fairly easy. You may find that you can get it off without using this puller, but because you can see I just use my hand, tighten it up a little bit, and the hub pulls right off. And the hub assembly does come off with the backing plate and emergency brakes and everything. And then you just kind of pull the hub up out of the backing plate and emergency brake.
Okay, move up from my arm.
Make sure you hook your emergency brake cable to the lever that's on the back of the backing plate, and then put the hub back in place. If you saw earlier, the bolts are still up in there, so I put the hub in place and then get it on the axle, and then basically just push the bolts through and start each one. Just get each one started, and then just kind of trade off and continue to tighten each one up little by little. Okay, I'm going to torque the top rear one to 65 foot-pounds. And at this point, I've gotten them all are kind of preliminarily tight, so I'm just torquing that first one. Now we can remove the jack from underneath the suspension and put it back under the leaf spring and raise it up in order to reconnect it to the link rod. Okay, we're going to reconnect the link here. So put the cushion back in place, and you basically on this car the nuts pretty much went on there no problem, and then tighten it up nice and firm. You basically just kind of keep looking, make sure that you have the hole exposed for the cotter pin, and once you get it tight and the hole is exposed for the cotter pin, then you can reinsert the cotter pin and let your jack down. And now with that leaf spring up and out of the way, it's actually easier to get to the the lower rear one and the front one. So we'll torque those to 65 foot-pounds. Okay, now we'll put the rear disc back on. Okay, now we're just going to put the washer and the hub nut back on and just tighten that up preliminarily. Now bring the brakes down and put them back on, and you'll want to start the top bolt first. It's the easiest one to get in. Get that top bolt in, and you can tighten it up some, and then actually don't tighten it up, just get it in pretty well seated, and then do the bottom bolt, and it just takes a while, doing it an eighth of a turn at a time. And once you're done, tighten them up, and you want to torque these to about 55 to 60 foot-pounds.
I've set the emergency brake, and now I'm going to torque this to 160 foot-pounds.
Okay, install the wheel, put the lug nuts on finger by finger first, make sure you don't cross thread them, and for those of you who know, you'll notice that we are putting a left-hand wheel on the right-hand side. That's because the tires were installed incorrectly and we didn't have a tire changer to fix that. They're unidirectional tires, so we had to reinstall it this way. We'll just tighten those up preliminarily. And now we'll torque the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds using a star pattern and reinstall the lug nut covers. And then finally you want to make sure that you get in the car. Since you had the brakes apart, pump the brakes a few times. Make sure you have a nice firm pedal before we test the vehicle.
We hope this helps you out. Brought to you by www.oneauto.com, your source for quality replacement parts and the best service on the internet. Please feel free to call us toll-free 888-844-3393. We're the company that's here for you on the internet and in person.